Hello and welcome back. Please welcome our filmmaker, the great Charlie Kaufman, and speaking to him is Mr. David Ehrlich, senior film critic of IndieWire.
Hi, everyone. I know that this could be awkward in the comfort of your own homes where you just watched I'm Thinking of Ending Things, but in your own way, please join me in showing some appreciation for having Charlie Kaufman here with us today. I'd imagine that everyone out there has a lot of questions about the film that they just saw, some of which, Charlie, you might want to answer, and others which you may demure, but we'll get to Oliver Platt and animated pigs in Oklahoma and all that good stuff in a minute. But I just wanted to start with a slightly broader overview of how we eventually got to that point. You have a really interesting history with adaptation. Adaptation, the film obviously being a hallmark of that, and Confessions of a Dangerous Mind were your two adaptations that ended up making their way to the screen. And I'm sure that you've been involved in several other projects that are in some stage of development or never saw the light of day. But I'm curious to know what, in this particular instance, made you feel like you wanted to tackle somebody else's material. You know, as a famously original screenwriter, what it was about Ian Reid's novel I'm Thinking of Ending Things that jumped out at you, if it was something from the book that sparked your interest, or if you were just in a mindset where you really wanted to make something and having some prefab material ready to go was easier.
It's not easier for me, but it seemed like it was easier for me to get something made that pre-existed. That seems to be the way the business works. And you know, Ian's book, I've been actively looking for something to adapt, and something even within a genre, because I thought that might help, and something that was small in terms of scope, so that the budget would be small. And so I stumbled upon Ian's book. It wasn't something that was sent to me. I think it might have been recommended by Amazon or something. And I liked it. And you know, I liked the dreaminess of it. I thought it could be made for a price. And I'm, you know, very interested in sort of interior lives, and this book had that. So yeah, so I mentioned it to my producer, who I worked with on several movies, Anthony Bregman, and he turns out he had a deal with Netflix, and he said he thought we could bring it to them and that they would probably, just based on the book and a meeting, agree to greenlight it, which is what happened. So it was greenlit before the script was written, which might have been advantageous for me.
But we ultimately have the Amazon algorithm to thank, which is surprising. It's a plot twist.
How so?
In that, you know, it may have been recommended to you just from your browsing.
Oh, yeah. Amazon led me to Netflix.
That's synergy right there, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, in some ways, your adaptation is very faithful to the book, and in other ways, it's wildly different. What was most important, whether it was a passage of the book or a certain tonality that you wanted to preserve? And what were some things that you wanted to either change or fix or even critique from the source material?
You know, I'm not really interested in critiquing somebody else's work as a work of mine. That would be an odd and, I think, inappropriate reason to take it on. You know, I think that the thing that I've come to over the years, and I think I came to it probably early on with adaptation, with the movie adaptation, is that I don't think it serves the work to do like a literally faithful adaptation. It just doesn't. You know, the first thing I adapted was A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick for Jersey Films, and you know, very early on. And I really loved the book, and I really loved Philip K. Dick, and I wanted to be really faithful to it. And it was fine. I mean, you know, the adaptation was fine, but it didn't have its own life. It didn't have its own tension. And it isn't a book, it's a movie. So I feel like I have to find the things that speak to me within the source material, and, you know, and explore those. And if I don't understand what so for example, when I read a book, in the first place, I'm just reading it as a reader for enjoyment. And when I read Ian's book, it was like, oh, this is great. I have so many things here that I'm interested in. But then when you get down to sort of brass tacks and you have to adapt it and you're looking at issues, there are things that maybe, you don't understand, and you have to kind of make them make sense to you, or what you're going to do is not going to be worth anything. So I sort of elaborated on the things that I thought would make it interesting to me, which isn't a commentary on Ian's book. It's a commentary on on what I could do, with it. If that makes any sense, what I'm saying.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think especially in the context of this book and so much of your work, which is focused on sort of the space between people and the impossibility to overlap thoughts entirely. And I think that's sort of implicit into the process of adapting something and, making it a sort of part of the text here. And, I think there's that Oscar Wilde quote that really sort of gets to the heart of this, that comes up in the movie, that most, or in the book at least, that most people are other people. And
that's not from the book.
It's from the movie.
Yeah.
And also from Oscar Wilde, the person. And,
that's intentionally acknowledged as a bit of a joke in the movie.
Right. And I think the way that you invoke other movies and forms of pop culture speaks to that, in that you sort of comment on them as a way of melding us all together, but at the same time, they become a source of solidarity in a way where it's a common language and you can understand that other people are thinking things that you are, even if you're isolated from them. So I guess
it's also a form of oppression, I think, yes. And that's something that I was sort of interested in. And that's why there's so much of that in this movie, is like there's so much that's shoved into our brains from popular culture and the lies of the people who run the world, and we are victims of that, I think. And I was trying to explore that as well.
Well, that gets right at my question, which you sort of just answered, which was about, on what side of the fence you fell in that conversation. Because I think there's a way to look at this movie and see something, maybe, from a strained point of view, about how this sort of shared language allows people to be close together and understand thoughts without having to communicate them themselves. But it is also a diluting force that mushes all of our identities into one another. And so what it sounds like to me from what you're saying is we're
being curated. We as a society are being curated by people who want us to think about certain things for a variety of reasons, some of which are just completely capitalistic. They want to appeal to a certain psychology so that we will buy this thing or watch this thing, or and by sort of pounding that into us, they're changing us in a way into beings that are more receptive to the thing that they're pounding into us, because we come to expect it. Like that's why formulaic movies or formulaic TV or any other kind of media is appealing, because there's a sense of familiarity in it that makes you feel safe. This is where this is going to go, and that's appealing. It's the same reason that Starbucks coffee tastes the same anywhere in the country where you buy it. It's because that's by design. That's what they're trying to do. And so, I mean, I'm more interested in the idea of people bringing other things to the world rather than becoming unified by this sort of prefabricated sense of the world that's being thrust on us. And that would be my hope for people.
Do you find anything ironic about putting a movie that represents those values out to the world through Netflix, which is curated through an algorithm and meant to sort of sink people deeper into the things they're already going to enjoy?
I don't find it ironic. I mean, I think it's interesting when I hear about their process, because as part of the Netflix family now, I get to hear about all of this stuff, and I mean, it's terrifying to me. I don't like it. But I mean, to Netflix's credit in this situation, I don't think they got what they thought they were going to get, and they didn't make me change it. So I think they're trying to figure out, like, they're running themselves ragged, trying to figure out how they're going to sell it. And so there's like a movie now on YouTube, which is, what do the things in Charlie Kaufman's movies mean, that they put together? And it's embarrassing to me. And, but that's their business. That's not my business. My business is to make something that was, to me, felt honest and and they allowed that to happen. And so that'll be out there. And, you know, hopefully it'll have some, it'll be of interest to some people.
Not that anything you've ever made has felt compromised in the least to anyone watching it, but was there a special feeling of empowerment creatively, knowing Netflix's business model, knowing that they wouldn't be able to fuck with anything that you, or wouldn't have the vested interest in fucking with the whatever it is that you turned in?
Oh, I didn't know that they wouldn't. I mean, you know, they said they wouldn't, and they didn't. But I mean, going in, I didn't know what was going to happen. I've never worked with them before. I mean, I'd heard that they're respectful, and they were.
Mhm.
But you know, I didn't think, oh, they're not. You know, I didn't think about that. I didn't think that they didn't have the capability or the power to change it if they wanted to.
You know, along those lines, I definitely wanted to touch on the various movie references that creep into your adaptation of I'm Thinking of Ending Things. You know, the Zemeckis gag in the middle, and then the end speech, which is lifted verbatim from the ending of A Beautiful Mind, which is hilarious. I know that, you know, the Zemeckis choice was made sort of at random, and that you had reached out to him and gotten his blessing before you
I
shot.
got his permission. I don't know if that's a blessing, but yeah, he said.
I'm curious. I'm curious twofold. One, if you had a similar conversation with Ron Howard, because that Beautiful Mind reference at the end felt, to me at least, a little bit more biting. And two, if because those kind of references feel so of a piece with your recently published novel Antkind, that I know you had
Yeah,
been.
no, I did. I've never spoken to Ron Howard. I did bump into him in a post facility fairly recently because he was editing his movie where I was editing my movie. So we passed each other. I was leaving the bathroom when he was heading into it, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's Ron Howard." But I've never spoken to him. You know, I don't think. I mean, I guess it's biting in the sense that I I wanted to have some. I wanted this character to want something that was impossible, that he had learned from movies, you know, by an isolated life that was dedicated to this media culture, that there was this idea that you could achieve this thing, you know, and you know that like that scene appears in a lot of movies, you know, in one form or another. It appears in Ed Wood, you know, at the end of Ed Wood when there's this big premiere, and it's like that never happened to Ed Wood, you know. Read Nightmare of Ecstasy and find out about the end of his life in Glendale, and you know, as an alcoholic. I mean, then that really bothered me about that movie.
You don't see any upside in Tim Burton making a movie so that he can give Ed Wood that moment that he never had.
No, because he didn't have it, and because the truth is sad, and,
Right.
and because, you know, Michael Medved, I think, wrote like the Golden Turkey thing and said that Ed Wood was the worst filmmaker of all time, and that became a joke. That became like a cultural joke, and this is a person's life. And the truth is, in my opinion, that Ed Wood was a kind of enormously courageous person. You know, he made movies that he wanted to make. I mean, give me a break with shitting on that, you know? And then to not have the respect to show what became of that choice for that person, you know, what he sacrificed really, to be true to himself. I mean, I think it was very upsetting to me, much more upsetting than Beautiful Mind, because I don't have any attachment to that guy, you know. But it is a movie trope, and it was one that was also inaccurate, you know. But it didn't. But I mean, the guy won the Nobel Prize at least, you know. So anyway, so.
Yeah, that movie may have taken a few liberties with John Forbes Nash's life.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and a lot of aspects of his personality that were unappealing.
Oh yeah. Speaking of that ending, I mean, it does bleed into another arena that I want to talk about this movie in terms of, which is the way it uses music and musical theater in particular. You know, I know that you had been working on a musical of some kind, a movie musical, Franco Francis, that never saw the light of day, but this feels like maybe the closest thing. What was it about The Lonely Room from Oklahoma? Is it the dissonance, the music that you wanted to communicate through Jake? Was it Judd Fry singing about how, getting a girl is somehow going to make him whole?
When I needed to come up with a musical that they would be rehearsing in this high school, Oklahoma came to me as a thought, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there were sort of many parallels between Oklahoma and the story that we were telling. Judd's story is one of them, one of isolation and loneliness and unrealized potential as a human being, and the mocking of the people around him. I was also really interested in the Dream Ballet, which I always found amazingly bizarre and cool. That this thing happened in this musical where two other actors, dancers, replaced the leads in the musical and danced this story. I like that. That's pretty avant-garde, and so, and it seemed to also relate to this sort of notion of what was going on with Jake in this story, that this could happen and make sense. So that's why I chose Oklahoma. It's for those parallels.
And am I right that Jesse Plemons was actually singing at the end there?
Not only is Jesse Plemons singing at the end there, but Jesse Plemons is singing without any, there's no auto-tune, there's nothing done. I mean, we went in there, we pre-recorded that before we shot the movie. We went into a recording studio, and Jesse sings and he plays the guitar, and he's, got a nice voice, but it's more like folk voice, it's more like that. And he, he said he was nervous because he'd never done musical theater, and he went in there into the recording studio and like nailed it in the first time. And it was, we were all like, holy cow. So yeah, that's Jesse.
And that leads us, of course, to the most important question, which is how deeply obnoxious was it to have a movie where both of the lead actors were named Jesse?
How obnoxious was it?
Yeah, for you on set to communicate anything.
Oh, I actually thought it was funny. Like in some early sort of comments on the movie, I'd read that people said that I cast two people with the same name intentionally because it was kind of like a comment on what the story was, and it's like, wow, that would be the wrong reason to cast anybody. No, it isn't. I think before we started, we kind of joked about how I would speak to either of them and not confuse it. But it didn't turn out to be an issue. So
as incredible a job as Jesse Plemons does singing that song at the end, I mean, his voice is really tremendous. There also feels something a little bit perverse about not letting Jessie Buckley sing, given how much of a sort of generational talent she is in that regard. Can you talk?
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about that. I mean, I wanted, of course, I would have loved to have Jessie Buckley singing in the movie, but it didn't call for it. And I also didn't want to just sort of like, you know what I mean? Like, it would be like you cast Barbara Streisand and you give her a song because she's Barbara Streisand. You just, like, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. But, I'm definitely, thinking about ending things. I'm thinking about Jessie for something else in which I'm going to allow her to sing. I'm going to ask her to sing, not allow her to sing. But yeah.
She has really jumped off the screen to me as one of sort of the gutsiest and most exciting actors to emerge in recent years. And I was thrilled that you picked her for this movie. Can you talk about what it was about her audition, about her screen persona that you felt was right for this incredibly complex part?
Well, what's interesting about this story, and I've told it, so I'm sorry if I'm boring people, is that I had cast somebody else who then couldn't do the movie, and I was looking for somebody to replace this person, and I called my production designer Molly Hughes to talk to her, and I mentioned this to her, and she happened to be in London with the director of a film that she was working on, and she was in this person's house, and she mentioned it to her, and the woman said, he has to hire Jessie Buckley, and I didn't know who Jessie Buckley was, so I got the movie Beast, and I just was blown away by that performance. It was so surprising, and like at every moment felt like it could turn, you know, which is what I really needed for, when I say it could turn, I mean the performance could turn, the character could turn, and on a dime. And it's what I needed for this character because, you know, as you know, she goes through a lot of transformations. And so then I was really sort of like, you know, sort of focused on her, but I auditioned to several other women and I sent them the poem, which the character recites. And because I thought that was a difficult thing to do. And I wanted to, you know, to sort of like hold the audience for that. And Jessie sent her audition tape back the next day. I mean, completely memorized, but also completely, you know, just intensely powerful and compelling, and it just, you know, just it made me certain that she was the person for this. So.
And there's a moment when she's reciting that poem where she flashes the camera, and it felt to me, and maybe you speak to if this was the intention of it, but it felt to me like it was a moment intended to teach the audience how to watch this movie, to sort of break through whatever, you know, scrim or veneer of distance that usually separates us from the movies that we watch, and sort of bring us into the fold and make us even reflect on sort of hear our own selves thinking as we watch it. I mean, was that a sense, putting that moment early on to really just catch us off guard and force us to look at things differently?
I think there are a few things like that where she looks at the camera in the movie, and I found that one particularly beautiful. I think partially because of the way it was shot, and partially because of Jessie's expression and the little sort of mouth movement that goes with it. I don't know if I intellectualized it and thought of it as anything other than a very intimate moment that's startling, that suggests that there's more to what's going on here than a conventional presentation of a story. But
is it hard to stop yourself from intellectualizing things when you're trying to create them or when you're working on set?
no, I'm not. I don't really intellectualize things. Actually, I mean, I kind of go. I mean, if I intellectualize, it might be the second thing I do. Mostly, I go with sort of instinct, and with the idea that this is affecting me. This idea affects me, and I trust that, you know. And then I could maybe explain it if I had to, but it's not what I immediately do.
And you know, I'm curious also sort of about like the genre inflections, the horror elements that wend their way into this. I mean, it's a really curious tone that you managed to sustain throughout that feels sort of unlike anything else, but also very much a cohesive thing. Can you talk just a little bit about like how you wanted the horror elements to play, how you wanted to maybe unsettle the audience and have us fear and ask questions about what's happening behind the basement door, or what's going on with that pristine swing set, and then maybe, you know, come at us from the side with a different kind of existential fear that we weren't anticipating?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think there was an intentional subversion of that stuff, but I mean, I think the overall idea of it was, first of all, there are things that are in Ian's book. Several of those things are in Ian's book, but I think what I was thinking is in the way that so much of this movie is borrowed and quoting other things, that a psyche that creates this story would have those elements from things borrowed from things, you know, that would sort of become integrated somehow in the rest of their story, in their real life story. These are their references, you know, and so that was the idea behind it. And that's kind of, you know, you see some of that alluded to when she goes into his bedroom, and you see different ideas of what's influenced this person in their life.
Yeah, I think there's a VHS copy of The Thing in there, which had me really excited for certain third act twists to come, which, you know, panned out to a certain degree.
You know, the thing that's interesting about some of the stuff in the bookshelf, there's stuff that's planted there by me, that's in the script, and then the prop guys added a lot of their own stuff. And excuse me, it was stuff that was you know, like I wanted horror movies there,
Mhm.
but the specific horror movies that ended up there were there. Those were their calls. I didn't dictate that.
Right, and I would imagine the Pauline Kael book, on the other hand, was definitely something that you had written into the script. And I don't think your opinion on it is especially relevant to the text of the movie itself, but out of pure personal curiosity, where do you fall on Gina Rowlands and Woman Under the Influence?
I like it.
Okay.
I also like Pauline Kael, but I
Sure.
think when I was younger, I didn't think I could disagree with her. And I
Mhm.
think that's part of the thing that I was playing with there. You know, you feel like you're young and this person is brilliant and therefore they're right, as opposed to that's their opinion.
Uh, Sort of just to wrap up and bring everything together. I mean, there's your movies, this one in particular, are pervaded with feelings of loneliness and hopelessness and regret that they work through. But I can't put my finger on why necessarily. And maybe it's just because it can be gratifying to see those ideas expressed so lucidly in a way that makes you feel less alone. But even at the end of a movie like this, and to an extent, even at the end of a movie like Synecdoche, New York, I can't help but feel uplifted. You know, it's tinged. It's not a pure sense of ecstasy, but you know, I wonder to what extent you are comfortable allowing for those feelings that you are hoping that people will not emerge beaten down, but kind of in their own backwards way inspired by.
I mean, my goal is not to beat people down ever. My goal is to try to do something that conveys something that feels true to me, and in the hope that other people will feel that they've been recognized and that and exist in having it exist as sort of an antidote to Beautiful Mind, you know, or Ed Wood. You know, like if you put something fake in the world and people aspire to it and then get beaten down because it's an impossible thing to realize, that to me is a damaging thing to do. To you know, deal with issues of, you know, loneliness and depression and worry and fear that I think are common, at least to some people. I hope it gives people a sense of community of some sort, you know, that their world is, you know, that's why I think Ed Wood would have been a better movie if it wasn't a joke performance by Johnny Depp and you know, who's basically doing John Lovitz or whatever he's doing. You know, and I like Johnny Depp. I mean, but I mean, it's like a caricature. It's not a person. And by doing that, you diminish this. Now, if you really showed Ed Wood, and I would be happy to make this movie if there was anybody who would be interested in, you know, in being an audience for it, where you show the struggle of a person and then the hardship that their life is. And then you feel like, as a person watching this, that your life, your real struggle in life is being seen. That's it. I don't need to pick on Ed Wood because Ed Wood is not the only example of that. You know, I mean, Eternal Sunshine was the same thing for me. That was my thought when I was asked to write this thing, was to write a movie about a romance after it's gone bad, so that it isn't just rom-com. You know, you have the little moments, and you know that they like each other, and then something bad happens and they like each other and then they're happy, because that's not life. That's not the way things. Then you actually have a relationship, and what is that? And you know, how do people sort of like understand that? You know, if you don't give them at least some point of view about it, your own point of view about it.
Yeah, I remember growing up and feeling like the movies had taught me that getting married was, you know, cutting to black meant a lifetime of wedded bliss, and
Yeah.
there wasn't going to be any conflict after that. And it turns out
Happily,
not the case.
happily ever after. I mean, what the hell does happily ever after mean? I mean, yet it's a part of our psyches, you know.
Feels like something to say at a funeral, maybe more than at a wedding.
What's to say at a funeral?
I'd say that feels like that would be a saying that should be trotted out more at funerals than at weddings. Happily ever after. But
Or never.
or never. Your point is well taken. Well, I think you know, in all the facets that we're talking about, this movie really speaks to those and delivered and personally rescued me and made me feel connected to something for the first time in a really long and limbo-like summer.
I'm glad. I'm really glad to hear that.
And I hope that some of the people who are watching this part of the Metrograph live screening series, feel the same way about it. And it's definitely in conversation with your other movies, as you were talking about, Eternal Sunshine and the rest, and a great invitation to go back and revisit those in a new light.
Yeah. We the thing that we have to cut. I don't want to keep going if you were like trying to wrap this thing up, but
no, I don't have anywhere to be. I'm just
I just wanted to add one thing. When we had our initial like friends and family screenings, we had like maybe 3 of them, and it was really interesting because people hung out afterwards for like over an hour in some cases, just chatting about it, all these different ideas about it. It was really exciting to me because that's what I'm hoping for, like that ideas are sparked, that it resonates with people in different ways depending on their experiences in the world, and I've tried to sort of make it open enough that it can include those different thoughts, and so it does feel like to me like the kind of movie that it'd be nice to talk about afterwards, which is unfortunate that we don't have any social existence anymore.
Amen. I mean, it's also a great movie about why it's so hard to talk to your parents, which may be a question better saved for my therapist than for you in a semi-public schedule. But yeah, I think all of the elements and the mistrials of communication that come up across the movie are especially pointed in that regard. But we can save that conversation for another time. But thank you so much for doing this, and thanks to everyone who watched the movie and then stuck around to hear this.
Thank you.